the end of the day, if we don't get local people and our national parks authorities and frontline rangers through this crisis in a meaningful way, we will lose some of Africa's parks. I have no doubt about that.
Conservation Spotlight, a series of interviews conducted with leaders in conservation that aims to share the current threats and challenges facing the protection and restoration of wildlife and nature all around the world. This series is produced by Behind the Scenes of Nature. Hello. Hey.
Yes.
What's going on? Can you see me now?
Nice.
Hey, there you are. My name is Donal Boyd, and welcome to another episode of Conservation Spotlight. During today's interview, I'll be speaking with my good friend Jason Bell, Vice President of Conservation and Animal Rescue for the International Fund for Animal Welfare, otherwise known as IFAW. IFAW is a leading organization that focuses on the welfare of wildlife in threatened ecosystems all around the world. Jason is joining me remotely from Cape Town, South Africa, while I'm conducting the interview from here at Orindi Private Game Reserve in Namibia. The topic of this interview: amidst a global pandemic, the world looks inward as we shelter in place during widespread lockdown. But there's countless people and organizations that remain out on the front lines protecting nature. What will it take to save the nature that we have left? What is IFAW doing to overcome the current challenges out there in the world right now? And how can you help? I guess you can start by introducing who you are and what organization you work for, even though I know all about it, but just for the audience, what is it that IFAW has done, is doing now, and what do you feel like about the future?
I'm Jason Bell, and I work for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. We're a global animal welfare and conservation organization with offices in 15 countries around the world. And we have, a mission which is focused on saving individual animals, protecting populations of animals as well as their habitats. So we really look at adopting a holistic approach to protecting wildlife. We believe that individual animals are really important ambassadors for the bigger conservation story that we need to tell. And so we're stuck at the moment in this really weird space. And but at the end of the day, wildlife populations are still out there, and the threats that they face on a daily basis continue. So one of the things that we've been doing in Africa, for example, is really working with parks authorities on a daily basis in countries like Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and a few others, but really to support frontline rangers. And I think, one of the biggest threats to Africa's wildlife continues to be poaching to furnish the illegal wildlife trade. And, I think it's at times like this that we have to pause and realize that it's often during crisis times when, our focus is elsewhere, that, unscrupulous poachers are working at their best. And this is in fact, what we're seeing right now. We've had some incidents of late, both in Malawi and Zambia, where our teams on the ground have managed to uncover ivory caught up in trade, for example, reasonably significant amounts, which really indicates that poachers and traders are still doing what they do. That's just one thing. I mean, there are so many threats. One of the things that this kind of crisis reminds me of a little bit is the approach to dealing with this crisis, particularly in the US, and our headquarters happens to be in the US, and we as an NGO raise a significant amount of money in the US, and we rely on that money to be able to support our mission at times like this. But I guess the response in the US to this crisis reminds me a little bit of the response to addressing global climate change. And one of the things that doesn't go away at a time like this is the effect of climate change and its impact on wildlife populations and their habitats, and on individual animals. And so, for us, it's a difficult time. We are in a fortunate position that we have teams on the ground in many countries around the world that, to a large extent, can still respond What it does mean for us, though, is we have to become a little bit more creative in how we support those teams. We have to support them in being able to do the jobs that they do on a daily basis in protecting wildlife, but at the same time, we also have to keep them safe because, this this virus is real, and we have to keep them, frontline rangers, for example, them and their families safe. We also work very closely with local communities in Africa, for example. We see them as part and parcel of the solution to addressing the threats to wildlife. And so we have to find ways to keep them safe as well. I mean, in Africa, I think you will see if you're watching the news, there's a lag in the impact of this virus on Africa. I mean, I think most African countries have adopted pretty strict measures up front, but at the end of the day, the curve will go up, and many people will be affected by this virus. So yes, we've had to change tact a little bit and really kind of over the next couple of months see how we can keep our people safe and secure to be able to do the jobs that they need to do to protect wildlife.
Yeah, thank you. And I think what I've seen lately, like just to comment on what you said immediately, is the coronavirus has made a human impact in the terms of like people are out of work, people are out of jobs, and local communities can't support themselves. In Namibia right now, like, this whole country is locked down. Literally all these communities, that people that were like making wood carvings and selling them to tourists, or people that were working just here at like this reserve as guides, or the Bushman people that put on like a little cultural show. They literally can't do their job. And where are they going to get money? And these are the people that are 1 degree of freedom away from the wildlife. How can we get people to actually realize that? It's like you wanted to go on vacation in Namibia, you're going to support these local communities, but now you can't go. Can you still support from afar? Or like, how do we get people actually to recognize that I really do need to support these people still, even though I can't go there? And if they support it now, they will have something to go and actually see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, part and parcel of a successful conservation model is making sure that local communities that have to live with wildlife on a daily basis and often come into conflict with wildlife, oftentimes losing their lives or their livelihoods when elephants go into crop fields and raid crops. I mean, that could be an entire year's livelihood gone for a family or for a local community. So economic incentives are really important, and right now there are no economic incentives, as you say. I mean, there's just nothing. There's no tourism. So, before this crisis, the indirect spin-offs from ecotourism into local communities, and we were seeing, that model was increasing and improving dramatically in many African countries, where local communities were seeing very direct benefits from tourism, either through direct employment in lodges, for example, or with micro-enterprise opportunities, or where, organizations like ourselves and other NGOs have come in and looked at alternative livelihood and food security models to make sure that they're part and parcel of the conservation agenda. So, yeah, right now there's nothing. I mean, it's scary enough to think that many parks are on the brink. If you think about the fact that in many parts of Africa, many African countries, they rely so heavily on tourism to fund their parks and to fund the protection of the wildlife in those parks. And then, to your point, the step beyond that, the people living outside the parks. I mean, just, how do we help them? And I think this is where it becomes really important to identify key partners. There are a number of organizations out there that are really focusing on trying to work with local communities to ensure that they get through this crisis. Just as they're working to ensure that they get through the crisis, we have to make sure that the local people come alongside us. So it's not an easy thing. I mean, right now we know, for example, in Malawi, there's no money trickling into those parks in Malawi. And this is, I think, the case in many African countries. The model in some countries, like in South Africa, where it's very different, where we have a handful of parks that are highly profitable, which fund the rest of the protected areas system in the country, is not the same in the rest of Africa. And so, I think we have to, as a global community, we have to identify those partners that are really working on the ground with local communities on a daily basis, trying to take up the slack where they've lost their economic opportunities. And to be really frank, I mean, this isn't only about money and micro enterprise ventures for local people. This is about food in their mouths right now. That's the reality. So, I mean, it's a really, really important point. It's not easy. I mean, everyone's kind of scrambling because I think everyone's feeling the pinch economically. But at the end of the day, if we don't get local people and our national parks authorities and frontline rangers through this crisis in a meaningful way, we will lose some of Africa's parks. I have no doubt about that. They rely so heavily on ecotourism, and we don't have one tourist sitting in a national park in Africa right now.
How can we learn from this lesson of, like, right now the value system is set up having this ecotourism centric thing, which has been a great model actually to follow because it brings value from the West, like money from people in Europe and in Asia and in America. It brings their money here. What if we can't depend on that value stream? The situation right now, no one could have ever predicted. Imagine the money 100% stops. There's no bailout right now for conservation organizations. That's the last thing on the list, isn't it? Is there a bailout for wildlife?
Well, I think the bailout right now is through the generosity of the types of people that support conservation. I mean, that's the bailout, really. It's not coming from governments. This is a humanitarian crisis first and foremost. And part of the work that we do as an organization is respond to disasters, right? But the crisis is a humanitarian crisis first and foremost. And that's where the money goes. This is where the money's going right now. So I think, when you talk about value systems, I think what I see an opportunity here when we talk about local communities in Africa, in India, in many parts of the world, I think we need to go back to making sure that we don't change the economic model and the economic incentives to something that is unsustainable. There is a rural livelihood model in Africa that has thrived for many, many years, which is based on subsistence agriculture. And yes, I think the focus should not be to go and replace that model in its entirety. There right now, in fact, I think what we're seeing through some of our community development projects is that the focus really is where we were trying to provide access to markets for communities growing alternative crops to maize, for example. So they were growing rice and vegetables, and we were selling that stuff to lodges in parks and that kind of thing. You can't rely totally on that because right now there's no market. There's no market for those folks. They have to be able to support themselves in a rural subsistence-based economy. And the reality is that that's a large part of what Africa is about. So sometimes when you talk about value systems, I find it interesting sometimes that people define poverty by Western standards. I mean, you visited local communities in Africa. I would say that in many cases, when I visit the parks in African countries or in India, for example, to me, some of those people look like the happiest people I've ever met. We really need to also think about how we sustain those healthy, happy, subsistence-based rural economies in Africa and provide incentives. The alternative economic incentives are there to, yes, get their kids into school, get more girls into schools, those types of things, provide opportunities beyond what they might know right now. But it's not to replace the model in its entirety because then it just falls apart.
Yeah, and that's actually, it brings to mind like one of the projects that Nadia and me went to go visit, the Chikalongo site. You're actually working with the local community, providing them water so they don't have to go to the river's edge to like risk being killed and attacked by hippos, which was happening multiple times a week and like many deaths per month. And it's like ridiculous that this was what was preventing the people from having the buy-in to protect the wildlife. It's just a simple water issue. We take that for granted. It's like right over there in the same room as me, I can turn on the tap. And in the other room, there's another tap. There's 2 taps within 5 feet of me. but these people had to walk a mile to go get water from, and they were facing sudden death from a hippo or a crocodile. It seems like that this is what you're saying is the most important thing right now. It's that.
That's exactly the point. And we've seen many failures in Africa in, where conservation organizations or other organizations have gone in to local communities with a top-down kind of approach and saying, this is what you need, this is what you need. And, I think that never works. It has to be bottom-up. And that's what we try to do in Chikalongo, which is a community on the outskirts of Liwondi National Park in Malawi, where literally, they were losing, 12 people a month at one point. If it wasn't a hippo, it was a crocodile or an elephant, because they were so reliant on the river, the Shiri River, for their water, and they had to go into the park to access water. So the very first thing that, was a game changer and something very, very simple was just to provide water outside the park. And so, a very simple thing, we do that. Once you've got water outside the park, you also then start looking at alternative economic opportunities. The local community, Chikalongo community is always their staple is always going to be maize. And that's what they eat mainly, the simple foods that they've been eating for years and years and years. But as a community, if they want to get their kids to schools, if they want to have a roof on their houses, on their huts, well, what about a little bit of an economic incentive? And so growing vegetables in that community wasn't so much about them being able to eat the vegetables. It was for them to be able to sell the vegetables to lodges for, small returns, but at least to be able to support a local economy. This is maintaining local cash-based economies. And that's a really important part of the fabric of Africa. And that's exactly what we will continue to do. And I think, this, when you talk about keeping communities safe from interactions with wildlife, right now it's keeping communities safe from something else as well, given this COVID crisis. So that's what we need to focus on right now in the short term, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I guess we want to hear a little bit more about what are right now on the ground issues. How are they dealing with these challenges of more people poaching, or what is happening on the ground in Malawi?
Yeah, so we've got this landscape project in Malawi, Zambia, which is focused on really protecting a number of parks across a broad landscape and across an international border. So it includes Kasungu National Park in Malawi, and then Luwambe and Lukusuzi National Parks in Zambia, which then really opens up the landscape to the Luangwa Valley, both North and South Luangwa. So it's a really important landscape. Zambia is a really important transit country for wildlife products that get poached both in Zambia, Malawi, Botswana. It's, a lot of, for example, ivory moves from Southern Africa through Zambia as a main transit country in Southern Africa, up into East Africa, and then out through either ports in Tanzania, sometimes ports in Mozambique. So that's why we initially started to focus in Zambia with some law enforcement efforts, both on the ground in supporting frontline rangers in these parks, but then also beyond the parks. We've established these operational units which can respond throughout the countries, intelligence and investigations units. And so they rely heavily on working with local communities, informants in communities who supply vital information. And just recently, unfortunately, again, and this is to the point that, these threats don't go away at a time like this, and that we cannot just sit back and relax. And it's not a lockdown for us. Working from home does not mean a lockdown for wildlife in parks. Just recently, Mike and his team uncovered a syndicate that was moving ivory from Zambia. They bust them in Zambia. This information came from informants in local communities in Malawi. Unfortunately, this, represented probably the death or the poaching of around 5 elephants in the Luangwa system. We think that these elephants came out of South Luangwa, which is one of Zambia's most important national parks. So yeah, I mean, the teams are responding. I mean, on the positive side, and this is always, we as a conservation community, we tend to sometimes look at the bad news. On the positive side, what we've heard from Mike is that they've really gotten ahead of some poaching events, because a lot of our work, anti-poaching is not just focused on keeping people out of parks. It's really working in local communities, understanding where poachers are moving, where are they drinking at night, where are they servicing their motorbikes, and so that's why we rely so heavily on people and informants in local communities to furnish really good information. And Mike and his team have really, I think in recent months, there have been a number of arrests. One of the challenges right now is they're making arrests, but they're not able to follow through with successful convictions because the judiciary, the magistrates' courts are in lockdown. But the reality is, we work very closely. Our model in Africa and in India, wherever we work, is working very much very closely with the government agencies. That's we're there to build capacity, enhance their capacity to do their jobs, and we have the full support of the government's agencies, and that's been a real, I think, for us, kind of blessing through this crisis, because in Malawi and in Zambia, the government agencies, even though they're in a very precarious position, like I'd said previously, financially, they're really providing the support that we need to be able to follow through with our law enforcement efforts on the ground. As you know, lockdown regulations, as they apply to you and me right now, cannot apply to frontline rangers. These guys have to be active. They need to be able to move across international borders like they do if they're going to be following up on leads.
And I guess just one thing, could you just introduce who Mike is and what he does? Because I'll put up a little picture of him, or a big picture of him.
So we've got our head of law enforcement in IFAW is based in Kasungu National Park in Malawi. His name's Mike Labuskaghni, and we've been working with Mike for many, many years now. He's highly, highly respected, and we've been very privileged to be able to work with him. The reality is that his approach is really about capacity building, but working hand in hand, as I'd said previously, with not only government agencies but local communities. If you want to be successful in law enforcement in the conservation space, you don't just. It's not all about the stick. It's not all about keeping people out of parks. It's about how you work with people, how you bring them with you, how you rely on people for vital information, how you work with government agencies, how you empower them to do their jobs. At the end of the day, you don't want to, we don't follow a private sector model approach in national parks. We want the government agencies to be successful in doing what they do. And that's very much the Mike Labuskaghni kind of approach and model. So, we're very proud to have him on board as part of the IFAW team. Yeah, he's a legend. And now I'll put up a picture of Mike with his with his stick. Yeah, you've seen that training. That was pretty intense last year. Well, 2 years ago. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do the training eventually. We're still gonna do that idea. Well, you're doing it with us. I'll have to run a marathon around my yard first before I even embark on it. Right. We'll try 48 hours. 48 hours. Maybe we'll get through it. But now I'm wondering, what can someone actually do from their apartments in New York City? What can they do during lockdown right now? Is the biggest thing you need money for a specific thing? Or I know we talked about Chikalongo. Do you have a specific fundraiser going on right now, or a campaign? What is the call to action, I guess? What I've been saying to people is, and if you're sitting in the US, if you're sitting in New York City, if you're sitting in London, wherever you're sitting, there's a good chance you might have visited one of Africa's flagship parks, right? I mean, you might have been to Kruger, for example, in South Africa. You might have been to Chobe in Botswana. These parks are in a dire situation, but even more precarious is the ability to protect the wildlife in these parks right now. So at IFAW, we've really prioritized two things. One is to continue with our critical emergency rescue efforts, and I think that's really important. We have a number, with our partners, we have a number of people, elephants that are undergoing rehabilitation right now, but we also need to be able to be nimble in response. So if there's a situation where an elephant needs to be rescued, we need to be able to do that. We need resources for that. We need resources to protect the frontline rangers. I mean, the reality is that their government salaries have dried up. So if we want to make sure that rangers are able to continue doing what they're doing in Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Kenya, we unfortunately need that support. And I think I think the direct connection for people there is the fact that if they've been to Africa or if they plan to visit Africa, if they want to come back and see thriving wildlife populations, now's the time to really act. So the work continues. Wild poachers are active and elephants are being poached. There's a good chance that we're going to end up with orphaned elephants having to need care. And so, the work that we partner with organizations in both Zambia and Zimbabwe to help rescue orphaned elephants. And this is the kind of thing we need to be prepared to do. It's not easy right now, given all the restrictions, but we need to be prepared to do that. One of the interesting little anecdotes, I think, from our partnership with Wild is Life and the Zimbabwe Elephant Nursery in Zimbabwe, where we're leasing a forest reserve near Victoria Falls called Pandamasui Forest Reserve. You know it very well. Yeah. What we've heard from the field there, from our guy on the ground, Josh Dankwitz, is, and we've seen some of the anecdotal footage, is the elephants there that had been rehabilitated at the Zimbabwe Elephant Nursery in Harare and are now being rewilded in Pandamasui, are starting to interact with wild elephants. And it's pretty amazing to see. I mean, this has been happening over the last couple of months, but it's happening more and more. And in fact, one of the elephants, Matabili, seems to be very interested. He's disappeared for hours at times. In fact, for a couple of days at one particular time, he disappeared and hung out with some wild bull elephants. And that's, and I say this because just recently, Josh has again reported that there's been some interactions with wild elephants. And it's really exciting for us because, we're in lockdown, but that continues. Those elephants are in their process of being rewilded. What it does mean, though, is that we have to make sure that the anti-poaching teams on the ground there are vigilant. We need to make sure that those elephants that we've put through intensive rehabilitation are not going to wander into some local community and kill someone or trample their crops. So when we talk about human-wildlife conflict mitigation, supporting the frontline rangers to do the jobs that they do, I mean, this is as important now, if not more important than it was before, this COVID crisis kind of hit.
Yeah, thank you.
I think, the other thing is that the other thing that I think is really important, and through the work that you're doing, for example, right now, is getting the positive messages out to the partners on the ground. I mean, it's like government agencies want to hear that we're going to be there for them, right? And it's not always about money. It's just about being there for them. And so, through mediums like this, I would encourage people wherever they sit in the world, if it's sending notes or emails, or go to our website, www.ifaw.org. Go and check it out. There are lots of calls to action there. But one of the things we're trying to do is stay connected to our partners. If you have specific messages that you'd like us to share with our partners, they want to hear that there are people that are going to come and visit their parks, that people are not going to now, lose interest in Africa and its wildlife resources, in Asia and its wildlife resources. And so, I would say, words of encouragement are always really appreciated by local people on the ground and government agencies.
I like that one a lot, actually. I think if anybody has a message that they want to send to these people that are literally, they're not on lockdown. They're locked in. Like they're in it. They're out there and they're literally in the bush protecting these animals. And I think if people can send their words of encouragement, if people can send a message, that'd be awesome. So maybe we can figure out some way to do that.
Yeah.
Either comments on this video or something. Yeah.
That would be amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's about pride, and these people are really proud of the jobs that they do, jobs that we wouldn't be doing. You know, I mean, it's just crazy the type of stuff they do. Another little anecdote from Mike recently. In fact, I was just prior to lockdown, I was fortunate enough to be in Kasungu National Park where Mike and the team were handing out some awards to rangers for going beyond the call of duty. And there were 2 lady rangers that were involved in chasing poachers, and they ran out of ammunition, but continued to chase the poachers and apprehend them. It was unbelievable. And I was very fortunate to be able to hand out these awards to these lady rangers. And there were a number of other rangers that also received awards, but just the type of work that they do, I mean, it just goes way beyond the call of duty. It's the stuff that we would never, like you say, we've seen that training that they go through. The training is one thing, but then actually, you know, facing poachers with guns and you know, is a different story. So yeah, I mean, there's pride. You know, they're very proud of the work that they do, and I'm always just absolutely amazed at how encouraged they are when people actually just show that little bit of appreciation. So yeah, the message to the global community would really be show your appreciation. It goes such a long way for these people doing this kind of work.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And that just reminds me of one quote from Mike that I'll never forget. And I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes thinking about it. An ounce of sweat in training saves a liter of blood in the field.
That's you got the accent right there. You'll be pretty proud of the
Is that pretty good, right? Yeah. Never will forget that moment.
That's a Mikeism. That's a typical Mikeism. Yeah.
Well, I have to try to interview him as well. We'll see how that goes. maybe as a follow-up.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I want to thank you for taking the time to set this all up. It's pretty precarious. I have this random setup here with lights and.
No. Thank you. I mean, it's really cool. It's really, really cool, and it's good to be able to stay in touch like this because it's kind of like the way it's going to be for the next couple of months.
Yeah.
It makes us all feel a little bit connected in wherever we're sitting. And you get out there, right? You're getting to see some of these amazing animals that we're dying to get out and see again. So feel free to send some pictures along. Also, keep your posts going because that keeps us enthused.
Yeah. Have you seen the vlogs?
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to say, or? I think we've got everything. We've definitely got enough. Awesome. Thanks very much, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good honest.
Yeah, dude. Well, I hope you have a sweet day. Cool. Peace out. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. And yeah, see you in the next episode of Conservation Spotlight.